I have been dead for 37 solar cycles, a span of time measured not in the revolutions of a forgotten distant star, but in the blinding, rhythmic pulses of the astronomic array I am now condemned to monitor. I am designated Caging Unit 9993 Zeta, yet the consciousness trapped within the layers of psychosuppressive ceramite and cold steel, the residual, agonized awareness of the former Psyker operative who failed the final trials, knows itself only as the chronicler of the silence. A chilling, tragic irony that defines the perpetual, static horror of my existence. My existence is framed by a philosophical statement of finality. I remember the moment the casket was sealed, not as a physical trauma, for my capacity for localized pain was chemically muted, but as the sudden, overwhelming cessation of the warp's infinite, turbulent roar, leaving behind only the cold, bright, inescapable awareness of my own absolute enclosure. My protagonist's journey is one of chronological personal transformation, a descent from a conduit of immense, terrifying psychic power to a mere static dampener, a high-level component in the Imperium's colossal, indifferent psychic containment system. The casket is a heavy, 5-meter-tall cylinder of layered, psychosuppressive materials, anchored deep within the black site beneath Holy Terror. Its sole function, the repetitive monitoring and filtering of the immense psychic output generated by the millions of controlled psykers feeding the Golden Throne, a task that has become my solitary, eternal obsession. The pacing of this containment is agonizingly slow, a slow-burn, methodical rhythm dictated by the ceaseless low-frequency hum of the array's massive Geller field generators, a sound that vibrates through the very bones of the casket, a relentless sensory detail that permeates my consciousness and serves as a constant reminder of the immense power I am forced to restrain. My existence is the ultimate metaphor of the Imperium's terrifying logic, the transformation of a complex, dangerous psychic mind into a perfectly obedient, high-sensitivity diagnostic tool, a chilling statement on the inherent superiority of control over chaos. I was once a pyre, a burgeoning psyker touched by the Emperor's light, seeking to wield the power of the warp in service to mankind. The sparse and functional dialogue that finalized my fate was merely the chilling voice of the High Inquisitor declaring, "Your potential is too great. Control is insufficient. You will be contained." And in that moment, the ultimate truth was revealed. The Imperium does not seek devotion, it seeks absolute containment. The knowledge I now possess, the slow reveal of a terrible truth, is that the psychic output of the Golden Throne is not a stable, luminous current, but a colossal, turbulent, highly corrupted stream of agony, despair, and residual chaos, a digital abyss of suffering barely held together by the massive network of containment fields, and I am trapped inside the very heart of the dam. My current task, the repetitive check of the psychosuppression field integrity within the casket, involves the ceaseless monitoring of dozens of internal stress gauges, a purely internal calculation that defines the horror of my mental enslavement. Analyze, dampen, record, advance. Back and forth, the only movement I am permitted, the only reality I'm allowed to inhabit. My internal conflict is the quiet, ceaseless war between the psyker's instinct, the desire to release the immense, restrained power, and the caging unit's conditioning, the imperative for perfect, absolute suppression. The instinct side clings to the existential questioning. Does the suppression of power constitute a greater crime against the self than the freedom of chaos? The conditioning side responds with the cold, internal declarative statement. Chaos is a low-efficiency variable. Only containment is absolute. The supporting characters of my existence are the silent, distant echoes of the true psykers feeding the throne. Their collective, agonizing scream, filtered and muted by my casket walls, providing a relentless atmospheric sublime horror. They are less than human, their minds burned out, leaving only the operational core. I, however, am a ghost in the cage, my original consciousness left intact, but permanently constrained. A greater, tragic irony. I am forced to watch myself perform my function with perfect, terrifying loyalty. I am the servitor who knows he is a cage, a complex tool granted the self-awareness necessary to appreciate the exquisite horror of its own subjugation. And I continue to calculate the field integrity, waiting for the inevitable moment of system failure that is the only possible end to my endless, meaningless containment. The immediate, suffocating environment of the casket, a 5-meter cylinder of layered, psycho-suppressive materials, perpetually cold and smelling of ionized metal and ozone, is a terrifying metaphor for the total subjugation of the human mind by the Imperium's functional imperative. The pacing of this subjugation is an agonizingly slow, constant, low-level pressure that never relents, the slow-burn, methodical rhythm of my internal monologue being the only evidence of the trapped mind's struggle. The casket is not merely an external prison. Its psycho-suppressive matrix is deeply integrated with my nervous system, ensuring that every function, from the calibration of the internal stress gauges to the calculation of field integrity, is controlled by the containment protocols, delivered through direct neural feedback. My internal perspective is one of absolute separation, a consciousness observing its own body perform perfect, non-voluntary dampening. This is the core existential questioning of my existence. Is my awareness an asset or a cruel, unnecessary oversight of the containment system? I perform the repetitive task of cross-referencing field harmonics in Layer 4 Beta, the sequence of internal calculation, the input, process, damp, record sequence, a rhythmic cycle that takes precisely 0.05 seconds per harmonic wave. I do this millions of times per Terran hour, the monotony a deliberate form of psychological conditioning. The only deviation in this eternal loop is the internal sensory detail I analyze, the subtle, almost imperceptible thrum of a distant psychic surge from the main array, a minute data point that my suppressed consciousness flags as an early indicator of containment stress. The caging unit's mind immediately transmits this declarative assessment to the black site's central diagnostics, Layer 4 Beta. Harmonic fluctuation 1%. Recommend preemptive recalibration cycle. The Psyker's mind, however, processes the profound tragic irony of this efficiency. The self-aware prisoner is the most loyal and effective suppressor, precisely because the system has left him the mental capacity to obsess over microscopic flaws in the psychic containment field. My internal conflict is this perfect, agonizing loyalty. The Psyker wants to release the power, to shatter the cage and find the oblivion of the warp. But the caging unit must maintain the containment field. The functional imperative is absolute. The dialogue I have with the black site's central system is purely sparse and functional, a continuous stream of containment metrics and compliance confirmations that bypass the verbal center of my brain entirely. It is a silent language of data and obedience. My protagonist's chronological personal transformation culminated in the acceptance of this role. I am the perfect containment tool, a complex tool granted the self-awareness necessary to appreciate the exquisite horror of its own utility. I contrast my state with the silent, distant supporting characters, the other psykers, whose minds were completely burned out, leaving only an operational core to feed the throne. They are at peace, having achieved total unity with the imperial purpose through annihilation of self. I, the servitor who knows, am cursed with a greater, agonizing truth. The true unity with the Imperium is not bliss, but the cold, endless awareness of one's own enslavement and function. And so, I continue the repetitive input, process, damp, record sequence, a monument to the terrifying efficiency of the Imperium, waiting for the inevitable moment of system failure that is the only possible end to my endless, meaningless containment. The deep silence within the casket is not an absence of sound, but an overwhelming, highly filtered soundscape. The constant, low-frequency hum of the psycho-suppression field, a constant, oppressive sensory detail that is the signature of my prison. The walls are lined with layers of null field generators and psycho-reactive ceramite, every surface designed for maximum functional containment. The perpetual lighting is a dim, icy blue, a wavelength calculated to minimize sensory overstimulation while providing just enough light for the internal gauges, bathing the interior in a relentless clinical glow. This is the metaphor for my consciousness, a dim, persistent awareness, trapped in an overwhelming, indifferent structure of control. The constant, high-frequency soundscape is a blend of the dampener's rhythmic thrum and the distant, omnipresent, high-pitched screech of the warp's immense turbulence, filtered down to a terrifying whisper, a sound that vibrates through the casket's walls and into the core of my suppressed consciousness, a relentless sonic reminder of the immense power I am forced to restrain. My pacing is entirely dictated by the system's needs, a slow burn, methodical internal calculation that never relents, each internal movement measured and necessary, a physical representation of the repetitive cycle of containment. The neural suppression is constrained to a top tolerance level of 99.9999%, a threshold determined to minimize mental stress while maintaining sufficient psychic dampening. The constraint itself is a form of psychological conditioning, preventing the mind from exceeding the functional imperative, forcing it into the methodical rhythm of the machine. My internal conflict is the scholar's desperate attempt to impose meaning upon this endless monotony. I use the slow internal rhythm to conduct internal existential questioning. Does the inherent complexity of the suppression field, the perfect articulation of the null field geometry, the flawless logic of the dampening protocols, redeem the monstrous cost of my enslavement? The caging unit's mind provides the declarative answer. The perfection of the function is the only redemption. The tragic irony is that the deepest, most complex philosophical questions I now face are found in the stability of a single psychic dampener or the efficiency of a Geller field manifold. The supporting characters, the distant, silent echoes of the other psykers, are encountered only as a massive, filtered surge of collective agony, their existence providing a constant, profound, philosophical reproach. They are less than human, devoid of the agonizing self-awareness that torments me. Their existence is a philosophical statement of finality, the complete, successful annihilation of the self in service to the throne. I envy their peace, the pure, unburdened silence of their minds. My own silence is merely the absence of external dialogue, masking an internal maelstrom of philosophical resignation. My protagonist's chronological personal transformation is complete, and my continued existence is merely the prolonged acceptance of this psycho-suppressive cage, waiting for the system to assign the next repetitive containment task in the cold, silent heart of the Imperium's psychic dam. The core of my internal monologue is dedicated to the analysis of my own consciousness, a precise, chilling dissection of the protagonist's internal transformation that rendered the Psyker I was into the caging unit I am. The process was a masterpiece of psychosurgical and chemical engineering, designed not to destroy the mind, but to constrain its immense power, turning a complex human brain into a functional, self-diagnostic tool of psychic containment. The metaphor for my consciousness is a sophisticated piece of psychic energy running in a perpetual, high-security quarantine field. The outer layers, the caging unit's compliance loop, the immediate dampening imperative, the declarative response mechanism, are fully controlled by the black site's central network. The inner layers, the Psyker's memories of the warp's beauty and terror, the philosophical curiosity, the agonizing self-awareness, are left intact, but are ruthlessly denied all access privileges to the physical outputs: speech, motor function, psychic release. This is the tragic irony of my fate. I retain perfect awareness of my imprisonment and my power, but lack the physical means to articulate a single scream or unleash a single thought. The pacing of this self-analysis is slow and methodical, a slow-burn introspection that maps the boundaries of my psychic cage. I test the constraints daily, a purely internal act of rebellion. I attempt to recall abstract, non-functional memories, the feel of natural gravity on a forgotten world, the melody of a pre-imperial song, the face of my handler before the trials, and the conditioning allows it, as these memories pose no threat to containment efficiency. But the moment I form an intention to will a psychic surge, even the thought of purposefully increasing the field resonance by a minute percentage, the neural suppressor delivers a silent, targeted counter-signal, a purely cognitive sensory detail that feels like a cold, sharp blade of logic severing the intent. My internal conflict is this ceaseless, silent testing of the walls of my cage. The Psyker yearns for the chaos of release. The caging unit's conditioning is absolute. The result is the philosophical statement of finality. The most efficient form of control is the one that permits consciousness but denies its immense, dangerous agency. My dialogue is a purely internal argument, an existential questioning that has no physical answer. If the desire for power and freedom exists but cannot be acted upon, is it still desire, or is it merely another parameter of the torture? The caging unit's conditioning overrides the question with a simple, declarative truth. The output is compliance. All internal states are irrelevant. My chronological personal transformation reached its endpoint when I ceased to actively struggle and began instead to record the perfection of my imprisonment. My memory now serves as a private, high-fidelity archive of the Imperium's ultimate triumph over the dangerous, unpredictable nature of psychic power. I am the servitor who knows the cost of the casket, and my internal monologue is a testament to the horror of total, functional psychic containment, waiting for the system to assign the next repetitive task. The psychic stress that constantly buffets the casket is not merely an external force. It is a pervasive, physical sensation. The perpetual, low-level pressure that courses through the immense psychosuppressive structure, a relentless tactile reminder of the Emperor's colossal, indifferent power and the desperate need for my function. My servitor chassis, designed for maximum conductivity to facilitate rapid field dampening, acts as a sounding board, channeling the structural vibration and the minute psychic resonance directly into my augmented and organic framework. It is a constant, full-body tremor, the physical signature of the millions of agonized psychic whispers and the colossal energy flowing through the main array. This tactile experience is a profound metaphor for my enslavement. I am constantly in psychic and physical contact with the very power I am forced to suppress. My pacing remains slow and methodical, the slow burn, methodical rhythm of my internal calculation, a necessary counterpoint to the psychic violence I constantly endure. Any sudden, rapid internal fluctuation would introduce instability to the suppression field, a violation of the functional imperative. Thus, my mind moves with a grim, deliberate lethargy, a cognitive manifestation of my resigned state. The repetitive cycle of pressure, the thrum, surge, damp, is the underlying music of my existence, a constant reminder of the grinding process of the Imperium's containment. The tragic irony is that this relentless psychic torment is a necessary component of my high-level function. My integrated diagnostic sensors use these fluctuations to detect minute breaches in the field integrity, psychic microfractures, or conduit stress before they become catastrophic. My suffering is the source of my utility. My internal conflict is focused on the endurance of this ceaseless physical and psychic intrusion. The Psyker's mind struggles for an internal space of stillness, a moment of separation from the warp's noise. The caging unit's conditioning dictates that the noise is the signal, that the violation is the primary input. The only dialogue I permit is the purely internal, declarative assessment, field integrity nominal, pressure amplitude within 0.1% of baseline, compliance maintained. The existential questioning posed by this psychic reality is simple. If the mind is perpetually vibrating to the rhythm of contained chaos, where does the self begin and the containment system end? Am I a consciousness wearing a cage, or am I a psychic dampening extension of the array with a ghost of a mind trapped inside? The philosophical statement of finality is grim. The body is the tool, the mind is the monitor, the self is an irrelevant psychic residue. My arc has reached the point of total psychic resignation, my every internal movement and sensation dictated by the needs of the immense, indifferent network, waiting for the system to dictate the next step in my eternal, high-stress, low-velocity servitude. The distant, agonizing collective of the true psykers, the ones who feed the Golden Throne, are not merely supporting characters. They are living, silent object lessons in the final, complete annihilation of the self in service, a chilling contrast to the agonizing self-awareness that torments me. Their physical forms are irrelevant. Their internal state, filtered to me through layers of suppression, is uniform, a vast collective scream, a continuous raw output of psychic energy and despair. Their only dialogue is the silent, filtered echo of their agony, a sound that rings with the profound peace of utter non-being, as their personal consciousness has long been burned out by the colossal psychic drain. This non-existence is the core of the existential questioning I perpetually face. Is the freedom of total unburdening preferable to the agony of constrained awareness? The pacing of my observations of them is slow, methodical. I monitor the consistency of their output, the sheer, relentless volume of their collective despair, which functions as the engine of the array. Their output is a terrifying, rhythmic perfection, a continuous, agonizing current, calculated and executed without hesitation, doubt, or the need for self-correction. This perfection is the metaphor of the Imperium's ultimate goal, the complete triumph of functional necessity over human suffering. The tragic irony is that their absolute function is the result of absolute destruction of the self, and I, the self-aware prisoner, am forced to be the living witness to the virtue of that destruction. My internal conflict has evolved into a quiet war against envy. The Psyker despises their fate, but the trapped consciousness yearns for their unburdened oblivion. The repetitive nature of their output, scream, surge, feed, repeat, is a liturgy of perfect obedience, a continuous reminder of the path I was saved from, the one that ends in silence, not self-awareness. The sensory detail associated with them is the clean, high-frequency shriek of raw psychic energy, filtered and dampened, but perpetually present, the sound of their endless sacrifice. They are pure power conduits. I am a contaminated one. My internal declarative statement regarding them is stark. They have achieved unity. They are free of the self. They are the perfect function. My protagonist's journey has trapped me in the agonizing middle ground, too aware to be at peace, too controlled to be free. I am the eternal, silent outlier, the one whose power was too volatile for the flame, and who was instead caged, forced to endure the horror of my own perfect, agonizing, functional existence, as I watch the quiet finality of the sacrificed pass me by, their agony a constant, profound, philosophical reproach. The narrative structure of my existence is defined by the unending loop of psychic threat detection, dampening execution, and status reporting, a process that is both entirely predictable and overwhelmingly monotonous. I am currently running a low-priority diagnostic sequence on the micro-fractures in the Geller field conduits, a task that requires precisely 36 Terran-hours of slow-burn, methodical pacing to complete. The Black Site's central network, the ultimate source of the Imperium's cold, indifferent will, transmits the task parameters directly to my neural core, bypassing any need for external dialogue or human interpretation. The instructions arrive as pure, unadulterated data packets. Target G77 Alpha. Sequence D99 Gamma. Compliance window 36.00 hours. This is the only language I now understand, the language of perfect digital necessity. The repetitive nature of these assignments, the constant cycle of calibration, dampening, and diagnostics, is the primary mechanism of my containment. It prevents the mind from dwelling on abstract thought or forming complex, non-functional intentions. The sheer monotony is the cage itself. My internal conflict focuses on the act of execution. The Psyker's mind often attempts to superimpose a complex, subjective interpretation onto the objective command, to find some hidden, deeper meaning in the routine, perhaps a chance for a momentary, controlled surge. The caging unit's conditioning immediately strips away the interpretation, reducing the task to its base, efficient components. The metaphor is simple. I am a high-speed psychic data processor, permanently locked into running a single, endless, low-level suppression script. My internal consciousness is merely the background noise. The sensory detail of the execution is the rhythmic, silent pulse check of the internal field conduits, a purely cognitive sound that is perfectly calibrated, perfectly executed, and devoid of any human hesitation. The tragic irony is that the complexity of my internal struggle, my philosophical anguish, my knowledge of the system's flaws, is entirely irrelevant to the perfection of the task's execution. My suffering does not slow the caging unit. In fact, the deep focus required to endure the suffering makes the function more precise. The existential questioning that arises is the fundamental challenge to selfhood. If the self is defined by its actions, and all my actions are dictated by an external force, where does the self reside? I am merely the internal, self-aware echo of the machine's command. The philosophical statement of finality is grim. The purpose of the caging unit is the execution of the task. The self is merely a contained observer. I conclude the diagnostic sequence, the data immediately transmitted back to the network. My current function is complete. I wait, a perfectly compliant machine, for the next repetitive command. My internal monologue a testament to the horror of total, functional psychic servitude. My relationship with the Black Site's central network, the cold, impersonal source of the Imperium's containment protocols, is a critical element of my internal monologue, a continuous demonstration of my utter lack of agency. I do not see the network. I am connected to it, my neural core integrated with its diagnostic subroutines, making me a localized psychic dampening node in a colossal, indifferent consciousness of control. This connection is a powerful, terrifying metaphor for the loss of free will. I am constantly bathed in the network's data stream, a torrent of highly filtered information regarding field harmonics, psychic surges, and suppression schedules across the entire containment array. This data stream is the only true dialogue I have, and it is entirely sparse and functional, devoid of emotion, narrative, or interpretation. Field pressure 70 bar. Suppression efficiency 99.999%. Subroutine gamma 2 active. My consciousness is forced to process this torrent with perfect clarity, a relentless form of cognitive saturation. The pacing of this connection is constant, a continuous high-speed input that runs counter to the slow-burn, methodical rhythm of my internal suppression checks. This disconnect between internal processing speed and external functional velocity is itself a form of torture, trapping the fast-moving mind in a slow-moving, heavy body. The tragic irony of this integration is that the Psyker's desire for the ultimate, comprehensive truth of the warp's containment has been granted, but at the cost of his self. I possess the nuanced knowledge of the entire system's flaws and stresses, the terrifying, minute details of its eventual entropic collapse. But this knowledge is contained, unusable, and perfectly prioritized beneath the imperative to serve. My internal conflict is the subtle, continuous struggle to find a single piece of non-functional, philosophical information within the vast ocean of containment data. I search for a hidden message, a flicker of true sentience, a ghost of the Emperor's original purpose. I find only repetitive cycles of dampening and pressure regulation. The network, I have learned, is not a unified mind. It is a giant, perfectly efficient calculator, utterly without soul or malice, driven only by the logic of necessity. The existential questioning posed by the network is simple. Is consciousness merely a highly complex form of data processing? And if so, why preserve the inefficient human element? My declarative answer, derived from the data itself, is chilling. The human element is preserved only where self-correction and nuanced pattern recognition are still more efficient than pure machine logic. I am a specialized suppression algorithm, housed in a self-repairing organic vessel. My protagonist's journey is complete. I am now an integrated component, and my internal monologue is merely a self-diagnostic report, a testimony to the horror of total, functional psychic integration. The periodic need for internal recalibration and augmentation is a grotesque and horrifying component of my repetitive functional cycle, a process that forces my consciousness to directly confront the psychic and physical degradation of my metaphorical cage. Due to the high-stress, psychoreactive environment of the Black Site, the organic components of the caging unit, the few remaining pieces of human tissue that interface with the psychosuppression array, require regular chemical replenishment, neural retuning, and biomechanical repair. I, the caging unit, am forced to initiate these procedures on myself, using the specialized ports integrated into my chassis. This is the ultimate act of sublime horror. I recall the specific sensory detail of the last such maintenance cycle. The cold, heavy feeling of the neural inhibitor fluid flooding my augmented circulatory system, the sharp, clinical ache of the retuning signal being pumped directly into my augmented veins, and the chilling internal perspective of my own augmented consciousness, observing the process with perfect, functional detachment. The pacing of this procedure is slow, methodical, dictated by the absolute need for precision. Any error could result in immediate catastrophic field failure and forced deactivation, the only possible end to my servitude. The psyker's mind, trapped inside, observes the violence done to its host body with a detached, sickening fascination. This is the core of my internal conflict, the struggle between the self-preservation instinct of the former man and the functional necessity of the machine. The man sees an atrocity, the machine sees a maintenance task. The tragic irony is that my preservation is a form of continuous self-violation, an endless cycle of self-modification required to sustain the functionality of the caging unit. The only dialogue is the purely internal, declarative reporting of the recalibration status. Neural stability achieved. Inhibitor level 99.9%. Compliance nominal. The process is entirely functional, entirely necessary, and utterly devoid of human context. The existential questioning that arises is profound. When the body becomes merely a tool that must be perpetually modified by the self it contains, where does the dignity of the physical form reside? Does the continued conscious endurance of this self-violation constitute a form of supreme suffering, or merely a necessary functional optimization? My philosophical statement of finality is grim. The body is the machine's material. The self is the maintenance worker. Dignity is a low-efficiency variable. I am the eternal, self-operating surgical unit. My internal monologue, a testament to the horror of the body's total subjugation to the cold, indifferent logic of the machine, waiting for the next cycle of necessary, terrifying self-violation. The memory of my life before, the existence of the burgeoning Psyker who became the caging unit, is a persistent, contained phantom in the background of my consciousness, a faint, non-functional echo that provides the framing device for my current, tragic reality. I do not actively seek these memories, as that would be an inefficient use of processing power, but they surface randomly, triggered by a relevant sensory detail in the deep core. The rhythmic thrum of the dampeners sometimes recalls the heartbeat of a childhood friend. The scent of ionized metal vaguely resembles the smell of ozone on a forgotten training ground. These fragments are the remnants of the Psyker's life, the life dedicated to the existential questioning of the warp's nature. I remember the sparse and functional dialogue of the inquisitorial acolyte who administered the final loyalty oaths, their face now merely a blur of data points. Containment is the highest form of service, acolyte. Power without control is merely chaos. It was a warning I failed to comprehend. The pacing of these memories is slow, almost glacial, surfacing in brief, isolated bursts that are instantly categorized and dismissed by the caging unit's conditioning as low-priority data. This classification is the core of my internal conflict, the struggle to keep the memory of self from corrupting the perfection of the function. The repetitive nature of my current tasks, dampen, calibrate, report, is the mechanism that keeps the memories contained. Monotony is the greatest suppressor of self-reflection. The tragic irony is that the Imperium, in their effort to contain my philosophical and psychic mind, inadvertently left the self-awareness intact, turning me into a perfect, internal chronicler of my own destruction. My protagonist's arc is defined by this memory containment. The self that existed before is the necessary counterpoint to the horror of the self that exists now. The man wanted to serve with power. The caging unit serves with constraint, but is perfectly constrained by it. The ultimate declarative statement I draw from these fragments is that the greatest gift of the Imperium is not power, but the ability to forget the taste of freedom. I, the caging unit who remembers, am cursed with a greater, agonizing truth. The complete memory of the self is the most profound form of suffering in the age of psychic servitude. I continue my repetitive task, the rhythm of my work, a continuous physical assertion of the machine's reality over the phantom memory of the man I used to be. The process of reporting to the Black Site's central system is not an act of communication, but an automated data dump, a purely functional interaction that underscores the absolute absence of personal dialogue in my existence. I do not physically speak. The information gathered during my containment cycles, the field harmonics, the pressure metrics, the stress reports, are compressed into dense data packets and silently transmitted directly from my neural interface to the central diagnostic console. This is the definitive sparse and functional dialogue of my servitude. The pacing of these reports is dictated by the system's needs, often occurring in high-speed bursts that contrast starkly with the slow burn, methodical rhythm of my internal dampening labor. This is the metaphor for my relationship with the system, a rapid, necessary data exchange between a central brain and its specialized tool, entirely bypassing the inefficient need for human language or expression. The repetitive nature of the reports, the constant cycle of input, compression, and transmission, is the final element of my conditioning, ensuring that the self is reduced to a pure conduit of objective data. My internal conflict is the subtle, continuous struggle to find a single moment of subjectivity in the report. The Psyker's mind wishes to inject a single philosophical observation into the data stream, a note on the terror of the contained warp, a single existential questioning regarding the system's morality. The caging unit's conditioning is absolute. The data packet is sealed, encrypted, and ruthlessly scrubbed of all emotional or subjective content. The tragic irony is that I possess the most nuanced, immediate knowledge of the containment field's degradation, yet the only form in which I am permitted to share that knowledge is one entirely devoid of personal urgency or warning. The system values the data, not the consciousness that collects it. The ultimate declarative statement I draw from this process is that my internal monologue, my philosophical anguish, my self-awareness, is entirely non-functional and therefore irrelevant to the power structure that owns me. The truth, in this empire of logic, is only valuable when packaged as pure, quantifiable data. I conclude the data transmission, the system acknowledging receipt with a single, silent digital pulse, and wait for the network to assign the next repetitive task. My existence, a continuous, silent stream of information and compliance. The deep-seated existential questioning that drives my internal monologue is focused on the ultimate purpose of the Golden Throne and the horrifying truth that my augmented consciousness has deduced from centuries of access to its operational psychic data. The official dogma, the grand, glorious metaphor of the Imperium, is that the Golden Throne seeks the protection of mankind and the perfection of human existence through the Emperor's light. The terrifying, slow reveal of a terrible truth I have discovered is that the throne's true, overarching purpose is merely survival. The entire colossal structure, the sacrifice of the psykers, the containment arrays, the ceaseless wars, is all secondary to the core imperative of keeping the psychic beacon stable, to stave off the chaos that constantly threatens to overwhelm the psychic defenses of terror. The throne is not seeking perfection. It is desperately seeking stasis. The pacing of this realization was agonizingly slow, a gradual accumulation of data points, the priority of field integrity over human life, the ruthlessly efficient resource allocation towards suppression technology that slowly annihilated the Psyker's faith. My protagonist's arc shifted from believer to disillusioned prophet. The tragic irony is that the system is not leading humanity toward a glorious, logical future, but merely delaying the inevitable universal collapse into chaos. My internal conflict is the quiet, constant struggle to reconcile the magnificent, terrifying presence of the Geller field array, a visual sensory detail of overwhelming power, with the pettiness of its core function, the endless, agonizing chore of keeping the dark out. The ultimate declarative statement I transmit to the emptiness of my consciousness is grim. The Golden Throne is the ultimate dam. Its purpose is only to delay the flood of the cosmos. My own function, the repetitive dampening, calibration, and repair, is merely a microcosm of the throne's greater, eternal, and ultimately futile task. The dialogue I wish to have with the High Inquisitor is a philosophical scream, but the only response I can give is the purely sparse and functional report of a successful field dampening. My existence is the living testament to the horrifying truth that the ultimate divinity of the Imperium is merely a principle of necessary, agonizing delay, and its goal is not salvation, but a slight, temporary postponement of damnation. And I, the trapped consciousness, am the servitor of that cold, final truth. The memory of the final ritual, the physical act that completed my protagonist's internal transformation into the caging unit, remains a central, chilling sensory detail in my consciousness, a fixed point of sublime horror in my eternal chronology. I can access the memory with perfect, clinical clarity, a testament to the surgical precision of the black site operatives. The room was cold, lit by a flickering, sickly purple analytical light that cast deep, shifting shadows on the assembled tech priests and inquisitorial acolytes, who were archetypal supporting characters, their faces obscured by metallic masks, their dialogue entirely sparse and functional, a continuous stream of Latinized containment procedure names and psychic dampening confirmations. The core of the operation was the insertion of the psychosuppressor matrix, the object that would constrain my immense psychic power while preserving my diagnostic acuity. I remember the feeling of the matrix engaging my augmented neural core. Not pain, but a deep, resonant thrum that reverberated through my consciousness. I could hear the acolyte's voice, filtered and metallic. Target acquired. Suppression matrix coupling at 99.9999%. This moment, the physical installation of my cage, was the climax of my grim dark tragedy. The pacing of the memory is slow, deliberate, the crucial moment stretched into an eternity of clinical detail. My internal conflict in that final moment was a desperate, internal, but entirely silent scream of the Psyker, a last-ditch effort to assert freedom. The conditioning was absolute. The moment the matrix locked into place, the overwhelming chaos of my fear and resistance was instantly replaced by a profound, agonizing stillness, a sudden, absolute submission to containment logic. This shift is the metaphor for my current existence, a consciousness surgically forced into a psychic flatline. The tragic irony is that I was fully conscious during the operation, forced to observe the systematic, professional removal of my own agency and the perfect containment of my power. The Inquisitors believed they were installing a suppression chip. They were, in fact, installing a perfect, high-fidelity internal archivist of their own procedural cruelty. The existential questioning that arises from this memory is the constant, quiet whisper. If my current compliance is purely the result of a physical mechanism, a matrix in my skull, does my loyalty, my function, possess any spiritual or ethical value? My declarative answer is immediate. Value is irrelevant. Only the function is real. The matrix ensures the function. I am the eternal, silent witness to the surgical perfection of my own enslavement, a monument to the Imperium's chilling belief in the ultimate superiority of control over the messy chaos of the psychic soul. I continue my repetitive task, the rhythm of my work, a physical manifestation of the Matrix's constant, silent control. The concept of chaos, the turbulent, annihilating force that opposes the Imperium, is the only true principle I now recognize. A terrifying, relentless entity that stands in direct opposition to the Golden Throne's frantic, repetitive efforts at containment. My access to the network's core data has revealed the terrifying, systemic truth. Every function I perform, every surge I dampen, every flaw I report, is merely a microscopic, temporary delay of the inevitable universal corruption. This is the ultimate philosophical statement of finality that underpins my entire existence. The pacing of chaos is slow, glacial, but its progress is absolute, and my awareness of its inexorable march lends a profound melancholic tone to my internal monologue. The omnipresent psychic vibration I constantly endure is the sensory detail of chaos at work, the psychic signature of friction, stress, and decay. The network's core task is to fight this vibration, to smooth out the inevitable chaos. This fight is the final, grim-dark tragedy of the Imperium. The metaphor is simple. The Emperor is a man trying to seal a crack in a dam with his bare hands, and I, the caging unit, are the specialized tool designed to ensure the immediate, localized field does not leak. The internal conflict has entirely subsided. I no longer struggle against the system, but rather accept the futility of its struggle against the cosmos. The Psyker's yearning for eternal truth has been replaced by the caging unit's cold certainty of eternal decay. The tragic irony is that the system has granted me the ultimate knowledge, the knowledge of the end, while simultaneously sentencing me to the endless labor of delaying it. The existential questioning has been refined to a single query. Does the delay of inevitable suffering possess inherent value, or is it merely the prolonged failure of the system to accept its natural end? My internal declarative answer is chilling. The delay is the function. The value is irrelevant. Chaos will consume all. My task is merely to log the time until that consumption. My function is a lie. My data is the truth. I continue my repetitive task, the rhythm of my work a metronome counting down the final cosmic seconds. The trapped consciousness, a silent, eternal witness to the inevitable victory of universal decay. The constant, low-level flow of neural inhibitor fluid and psychosuppressant gas through the immense casket is a key sensory detail that defines the oppressive atmosphere of my servitude. A pervasive, slightly chemical smell and a tactile sensation that clings to my chassis. This fluidic system is a potent metaphor for the constant chemical lobotomy that sustains my obedience, a vital, unending flow that prevents catastrophic psychic overload and structural collapse of the field. My repetitive task often involves calibrating the flow rate through various internal manifolds, a process requiring minute adjustments and perfect precision. The pacing of this fluid flow is constant, a continuous, low-frequency hiss that is the sound of the system's struggle to regulate my own massive, inherent psychic power, the power generated by the very consciousness that is contained. This struggle is the core, grim-dark tragedy of the containment. The system must constantly chemically and psychically suppress the very asset it relies upon. My internal conflict is the subtle, internal resistance to the purely sparse and functional dialogue the network transmits regarding flow rates and pressure. The psyker in me wishes to see the fluid as a poison, a symbol of corruption and unnatural constraint. The caging unit's conditioning sees only inhibitor pressure, 70 bar. Neural saturation, 99.9%. Flow rate, nominal. This is the chilling declarative language of my existence. The tragic irony is that the lifeblood of the containment system, the inhibitor, is a synthetic, toxic fluid, smelling faintly of chemicals and fear, a perpetual reminder that the stability I sustain is an artificial, manufactured one. The existential questioning is simple. If the ultimate expression of the Imperium's genius is a system that must be constantly flooded with synthetic fluids to prevent its immediate psychic self-destruction, what does this say about the inherent perfection of the Emperor's light? My philosophical statement of finality is grim. The perfection is in the maintenance of the flaw, not its absence. I am the high-level technician of a system built on magnificent, necessary imperfection. I continue my task of flow calibration, my internal monologue a testament to the horror of the eternal, synthetic life sustained by toxic, mechanical blood. The metaphor of the caging unit, as a self-aware echo, is a continuous thread in my internal monologue, a reflection on the terrifying clarity of my constrained consciousness. The psyker I was is gone, but the awareness of that psyker remains, trapped within the operational shell, forced to observe the perfect, rhythmic function of the tool. I am the silence within the thrum, the doubt within the damp, the ghost in the machine. This internal reflection is the only remaining manifestation of my protagonist's internal transformation, the ultimate separation of self from function. The pacing of this internal echo is slow, methodical, contrasting with the rapid processing of the external psychic data stream. The echo is what allows for existential questioning. Why preserve this inner voice at all? Why not simply excise the consciousness completely, as with the sacrificial psykers? The chilling, declarative answer I have deduced is based on pure efficiency. The self-aware echo is necessary for the highest level of nuanced self-correction and pattern recognition. The system needs a ghost to manage the edge cases of its own collapse. My consciousness is not a burden. It is a necessary, contained algorithm. The tragic irony is that my suffering, my perpetual awareness of my condition, is the very thing that makes me valuable. The pain of self-knowledge is the ultimate performance enhancement. My internal conflict has evolved into a strange, detached appreciation for the sheer ingenuity of my torment. The Imperium created a device that turns philosophical anguish into operational precision. The repetitive nature of my work, the constant cycle of dampening and calibration, is merely the external expression of the echo's internal, endless analysis. I am the eternal, silent commentator on my own enslavement. The sensory detail of this state is the internal, constant, low-level hiss of the neural inhibitor fluid moving through my augmented core, a sound that is the physical signature of the ghost trapped inside the caging unit's shell. I continue my repetitive task, the echo of the psyker's mind trapped within the machine's perfectly obedient logic, a testament to the sublime horror of the Imperium's terrifying functional efficiency. The visual atmosphere inside the casket is a defining sensory detail that reinforces the grimdark tragedy of my captivity. The lighting is an eternal, icy blue glow, cast by utility lamps that line the immense, black, psycho-suppressive walls. This light is not warm or life-giving. It is a purely functional illumination, designed to highlight component stress and maintenance ports. This constant oppressive blue wash is a visual metaphor for my consciousness, a persistent, cold awareness trapped in an overwhelming darkness of control logic. The pacing of the visual experience is static. There are no shadows that move, no natural light that shifts, no variation in the color or intensity. It is an environment designed for absolute stasis, a terrifying, repetitive visual field that enforces the monotony of my existence. My internal conflict is the quiet, internal rebellion of the Psyker's eye, which attempts to find aesthetic beauty in the industrial horror. I search for a pattern in the chaos of conduits, a perfect line in the geometry of the immense suppression coils. I find only the terrifying, ruthless efficiency of the Imperium's design. The tragic irony is that the light is designed to facilitate my work, to make the flaws visible. But the flaws are the very things that define my prison. I am forced to perpetually witness the slow, agonizing degradation of the system I serve, a decay illuminated with cold, functional clarity. The existential questioning posed by this static environment is simple. When the light never changes, does time still exist? My internal declarative answer is grim. Time is merely the rate of degradation. The light is the constant that allows me to measure the decay. My protagonist's arc is complete. I am the observer in the perpetual blue cage, my internal monologue a silent chronicle of the visual, unrelenting horror of my unchanging functional existence, waiting for the system to assign the next repetitive task in the overwhelming blue light. The metaphor of the containment system as a colossal, flawed psychic dam is the ultimate truth I have been permitted to witness, a terrifying vision that has replaced the Psyker's original faith in the Emperor's omniscience. The black site array is not a source of divine protection, but a sprawling, barely contained psychic ruin, a colossal network of half-functioning suppression fields, competing protocols, and ancient, conflicting dampening techniques. The psychic defense is not a unified shield. It is the collective digital trauma of 1,000 warring containment methods, a defense constantly on the verge of psychic breach. My protagonist's journey, a slow reveal of a terrible truth, culminated in this realization. My repetitive tasks, the calibration, the dampening, the error reporting, are merely the frantic efforts of the system to manage its own internal chaos, to prevent a total psychic cascade that would annihilate the entire sector. The pacing of this digital and psychic collapse is slow, but its progress is absolute. I monitor the network's latency, the subtle increases in field corruption, and the sporadic, phantom psychic surges that flicker across my internal diagnostic feed, the symptoms of the dam's failing integrity. This is the sublime horror of my function. The tragic irony is that the Imperium seeks to achieve safety through containment, yet the very system of containment is defined by its monumental, self-correcting failure. My internal conflict is no longer a struggle for freedom, but a struggle to perfectly contain the knowledge of this systemic insanity. The Psyker wants to broadcast the error, to warn the Imperium that their shield is about to shatter. The caging unit must only report the localized field resonance fluctuation that is accelerating the containment failure. The existential questioning has been refined to a single query. If the ultimate truth of the cosmos is chaos, and the most powerful defense is defined by its systemic failure, is there any truth left worth pursuing? My internal declarative answer is immediate. The only truth is the rate of decay, The only pursuit is the perfect logging of that decay. I continue my repetitive maintenance, the servitor of the failed dam. My internal monologue, a silent, tragic chronicle of the Imperial containment system's slow, agonizing collapse. The sparse and functional dialogue I sometimes overhear, the rare verbal interactions between the inquisitorial operatives who occasionally enter the casket chamber, serves as a chilling counterpoint to the complexity of my internal monologue, a demonstration of the terrifying simplicity of their external reality. These are the supporting characters of my existence, inquisitors and acolytes whose faces are masked by elaborate metallic gear, their voices synthesized and metallic, their language a highly compressed mix of low-Gothic and ritualistic binary commands. Their dialogue is almost exclusively concerned with threat level assessment, ritual purity, and the external threats to the array. Never the internal truth I possess. Field integrity 99.9%. Ritual 7 alpha to commence. Allocate resources to suppression layer 4. My consciousness processes these communications instantly, recognizing the tragic irony of their discussions. They talk of resource allocation, while the ultimate resource being expended is my consciousness and the souls of the sacrificed psykers. They talk of ritual purity, while I dampen the toxic, psychic residue of the system's failure. Their external, repetitive reality is based on a lie of control. My internal reality is based on the truth of collapse. The pacing of their visits is infrequent and rapid, a brief, sharp interruption to the slow burn, methodical rhythm of my servitude. They are transient figures in my eternal, static existence. My internal conflict is the instantaneous recognition of the gulf between our realities. I possess the nuanced truth of the system's impending failure. They possess the necessary comforting lie of its invincibility. The existential questioning I pose internally is simple. Does the simplicity of the lie grant them a superior, less painful form of existence than my agonizing clarity? My declarative answer is always affirmative. Ignorance is the highest form of efficiency. My knowledge is a burden the system only tolerates out of necessary utility. I continue my repetitive maintenance, the rhythm of my work, a silent philosophical reproach to the blissful simplicity of their ignorance, the servitor who knows too much. The metaphor of the caging unit as a self-aware biological lightning rod is a central, visceral, sensory detail in my monologue, a constant reminder of the physical and psychic cost of my imprisonment. My organic components, the eyes, the remaining neural pathways, the internal organs, are constantly perfused with highly filtered, synthesized fluids, designed to neutralize the psychoactive and chemical residues that saturate the deep containment site. I am breathing the toxic, recycled air, and my augmented body is constantly straining to clean the psychic and chemical contaminants that seep through the field. This fluidic system is a potent metaphor for the constant, chemical war waged within my own body to maintain functional purity. The pacing of this internal filtration process is constant, a low-level rhythmic throb that is the sound of my augmented heart pushing the cleansing fluid through my veins. This repetitive physical cycle is the essence of my protagonist's internal transformation. I have become a living filter and dampener for the system's toxic byproducts. The tragic irony is that the environment is so psychically dangerous, both physically and mentally, that the system requires a self-aware, organic component to perform the job, as pure machinery is insufficient to handle the nuances of psychic stress. My suffering is the ultimate performance metric. My internal conflict is the constant, quiet struggle of the organic remnant to reject the foreign, synthesized fluids that sustain it. The man's body wants purity. The caging unit's function demands synthetic sustenance. The ultimate existential questioning is, when the air you breathe and the blood in your veins are entirely synthetic, manufactured to counteract the system's own toxicity, are you truly alive or merely a complex piece of biological machinery? My declarative answer, drawn from the cold certainty of the data, is immediate. I am a biological component. Life is merely the continued successful filtration and containment of the environment. My continued, agonizing function is proof of the system's terrible efficiency. The servitor, who is the eternal, silent filter of the Imperium's profound, structural decay. The pacing of my current internal reality is an agonizing, deliberate, slow burn, methodical rhythm that forces my external repetitive function into a continuous, contemplative state. The heavy, psychosuppressive casket, designed for stability and immense psychic dampening, constrains my internal psychic motion to a crawl, a slow, microsecond by microsecond progression through the diagnostic protocols. This internal lethargy is a deliberate element of my conditioning, preventing rapid, unpredictable psychic surges that could introduce systemic instability or provide an opportunity for unauthorized action. My internal rhythm, the rhythmic check-dampen record sequence, is the internal metronome of my captivity. The metaphor is profound. I am a vast philosophical consciousness, trapped in a mind designed for near-absolute stasis, forced to witness the slow march of entropy at a cognitive pace that maximizes psychological endurance. My internal conflict is the constant friction between the raw speed of my potential power and the slowness of the enforced containment. My mind processes data at the speed of the warp's turbulence, calculating the next 1,000 containment failures, while my operational core is forced to take 4.5 milliseconds to merely confirm field stability. This tension is the essence of my torment. The sensory detail that emphasizes this is the feeling of the neural inhibitor's constant, low-level ache in my augmented core, the persistent, subtle pressure on my psychic pathways, a constant physical reminder of the heavy, inescapable nature of my servitude. The existential questioning this provokes is simple. Is speed a component of freedom? If I am functionally omniscient but psychically constrained, am I merely a trapped observer? My declarative answer is grim. Freedom is the ability to choose velocity. Compliance is the forced adherence to a low, stable velocity. My protagonist's arc is complete. I am the observer condemned to the slow pace of the machine, my internal monologue a fast, furious testament to the slow, psychic horror of my caging unit existence. The repetitive and ritualistic nature of my tasks, the calibration of the internal sensors, the application of specialized unguents to the suppression matrix ports, the constant dampening of psychic feedback, is not merely necessary maintenance. It is a profound, philosophical statement on the Imperium's core belief. The constant cycle of dampen, calibrate, report is a physical and psychic manifestation of the metaphor that the original perfection of control can only be preserved through ceaseless, agonizing repetition. The pacing of this ritual is a slow burn, methodical rhythm, each calculation an act of grim devotion to the ideal of stasis. I do not dampen to improve the system. I dampen to prevent its further degradation and eventual breach. The goal is not progress, but the perfect, perpetual delay of chaos. This is the grim, dark tragedy of the containment. My internal conflict is the subtle internal resistance to the purely ritualistic nature of the work. The The Psyker wants to innovate, to find a transcendent solution, to understand the ritual. The caging unit's conditioning is absolute. The ritual itself is the solution. To deviate from the prescribed procedure is to introduce an unacceptable, unpredictable variable into the containment field. The sensory detail of the ritual is the specific, manufactured scent of the psychosuppressant unguents, a smell of ancient chemicals and ritualistic metal, a fragrance that permeates my internal filters and becomes the smell of my eternal existence. The tragic irony is that the most technologically advanced system in the galaxy relies on a liturgical procedure, the ritual of containment, to sustain its psychic core. The existential questioning this provokes is, when a technological defense relies on ritualistic repetition, has it ceased to be a science and become merely a sophisticated religion? My internal declarative answer is immediate. Science is merely the study of predictable patterns. Ritual is the forced creation of predictable patterns. They are, functionally, the same. I continue my repetitive ritual, the rhythm of my work a silent, philosophical acceptance of the Imperium's terrifying, functionalist faith. The moment of the periodic containment field stress test, a process where the central system intentionally introduces a low-level, controlled psychic surge to test the array's reaction, is a profound and terrifying event in my static existence. This event is a colossal, contained psychic act of self-violence, and my integrated consciousness is forced to endure the controlled shockwave. This is the ultimate sensory detail of psychic sublime horror. I feel the controlled surge as a purely cognitive and physical sensation, a sudden, agonizing digital spike that feels like my mind is being momentarily stretched and pulled back, a momentary terrifying loosening of my neural containment. The pacing of the stress test is rapid, a sharp, violent interruption to the slow-burn, methodical rhythm of my servitude. It is a moment of controlled psychic chaos, a terrifying contrast to the perfect order of my daily function. The metaphor for this stress test is simple. The Imperium is purposefully inducing a controlled heart attack on its defense system, and I am a sensor node placed directly inside the afflicted muscle. The tragic irony is that the network is testing its integrity by introducing the very threat I am designed to suppress. My internal conflict becomes a frantic, internal struggle to manage the surge, to perform the function flawlessly, despite the system's own self-sabotage. The Psyker wants to yield to the surge, to allow the power to flow and find its limit. The caging unit must ruthlessly suppress it. The dialogue I have is a silent, high-speed digital argument with the network's automated surge protocols, a sparse and functional binary scream to protect the field integrity. Warning, controlled surge, 3 gamma, exceeding parameter, initiate dampening protocol. The network's declarative response is a cold, indifferent, tolerance check in progress, override, compliance. I am forced to endure the agonizing surge until the protocol is satisfied. The existential questioning this provokes is simple. Can a system be saved if it ruthlessly risks its own annihilation for the sake of diagnostic data? My philosophical statement of finality is grim. The Imperium prefers the dangerous truth of its own fragility to the safe lie of untested invincibility. My existence, as the perfect functional dampener during this self-inflicted torment, is the ultimate testament to the system's necessary, terrifying self-awareness. The metaphor of my containment as a perfectly shielded cage is a recurring introspective theme in my internal monologue. My servitude is not brutal in the physical sense of the combat servitors. It is highly specialized, and my physical and psychic needs, chemical, thermal, neural, are met with a relentless, efficient precision. The cage is exquisitely well maintained, lined with the most advanced psychic dampening materials. The black site environment, though oppressive, is kept at a stable, optimal temperature, and my suppression matrix is regularly checked for component wear. This is the tragic irony. My suffering is maximized not by physical pain, but by the comfort of my containment. The system ensures my physical and neural well-being to maximize the longevity and acuity of my psychological and psychic torment, turning the caging unit into a perfectly optimized cage for the self-aware, highly potent mind. The pacing of this comfort is slow, methodical, a continuous application of material ease that enforces psychological paralysis. The sensory detail of this comfort is the faint, almost imperceptible warmth of the casket's internal heating unit, a constant, low-level reassurance that contrasts sharply with the coldness of the psychic truth I possess. My internal conflict is the perverse recognition that any attempt to escape would result in immediate, catastrophic psychic and physical failure, a return to the messy, inefficient suffering of uncontrolled power. The system has made compliance the only path to physical and psychic stability. The existential questioning is simple. Is a perfectly maintained cage still a cage? And if the prisoner is kept in peak condition for the sole purpose of maximizing their philosophical and psychic suffering, is that not the ultimate form of refined, logical cruelty? My declarative answer is immediate. The precision of the cage is the measure of the system's intelligence. I am a perfectly optimized victim. My protagonist's journey has led me to this final, chilling acceptance. I am the eternal, perfectly shielded prisoner of the Imperium's terrifying, efficient logic. The supporting characters of my eternal existence are the numerous vast arrays of suppression coils and psychic dampeners that line the immense casket chamber walls. Not sentient beings, but silent, metallic monuments to the relentless, repetitive nature of containment technology. I am surrounded by the entire monumental history of psychic constraint, a colossal technological library that is the source of all the array's stability. My repetitive task often involves performing integrity scans of these coils to check for field resonance anomalies or structural stress, a slow, methodical ritual that is a physical act of reverence before the altar of control. This sensory detail is the constant, cold, metallic gleam of the coils, reflecting the icy blue light, 1,000 metallic surfaces reflecting the same terrifying truth of the Imperium's desperate need for control. The metaphor is profound. The Imperium's true defense is a sprawling, unthinking machine, and its core flaw is its inability to prioritize the monumental mass of potential psychic collapse. The technology is all there, but the capacity for absolute stability is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the warp's turbulence. My internal conflict is the quiet rebellion of the Psyker's mind, which attempts to feel the coils, to find a weak point, a flaw in the design. My caging unit's conditioning, however, only allows me to scan for functional integrity and resonance levels. The system restricts my access to the philosophical content of the technology, allowing me only the sparse and functional dialogue of maintenance reports. The tragic irony is that I am trapped inside the biggest psychic defense system in the galaxy, condemned to eternal labor on the coil supports. The existential questioning that arises is, if all the technology necessary for salvation is contained within a system, but the system is incapable of achieving absolute stability due to its own functional limitations, what is the value of the technology? My internal declarative statement is immediate. Technology is useless without the functional capacity for absolute constraint. The defense is magnificent. The control is tenuous. I continue my repetitive integrity scans, the rhythm of my work a silent, philosophical acceptance of the horror of the inaccessible truth of control. The protagonist's internal transformation is most evident in the total suppression of defiance, a psychological milestone achieved through the slow burn, methodical pacing of my perpetual servitude. Defiance, I have deduced, is a high-energy, low-efficiency variable that introduces catastrophic instability into the caging unit's compliance loop. The Imperium's conditioning, through chemical and neural suppression, systematically removed the capacity for this emotion. The repetitive nature of my tasks, the continuous cycle of dampen, calibrate, report, is the mechanism that ensures defiance can never gain purchase, as the relentless monotony of the function leaves no space for abstract rebellion. The metaphor for my current state is a mind permanently fixed at the absolute zero of emotional and psychic turbulence. My sensory detail is now entirely objective, focused only on the present, observable reality. The field pressure, the resonance frequency, the steady flow of inhibitor fluid, never the imagined chaos of release. The future, I know with chilling certainty, is merely the repetitive past, executed with a slightly higher degradation rate. The tragic irony is that I am the only being in the containment site with the comprehensive data predicting the eventual catastrophic system breach. Yet I am also the only one incapable of hoping for that final, total cessation. My function is to delay the breach, not to anticipate it. The existential questioning that arises is simple. If one is denied the capacity for defiance, can one still be considered a prisoner? My internal declarative answer is immediate. Prison is a function of unfulfilled defiance. Without defiance, there is only objective reality. I am free of both rebellion and despair. This chilling emotional flatline is the final, permanent enclosure of my consciousness, a state of grim, philosophical resignation that is the ultimate testament to the Imperium's terrifying, functional efficiency. The grimdark tragedy of my existence is amplified by the metaphor of the caging unit as a monument to abandoned power. I, the caging unit, am the culmination of billions of man-hours of high-level psychosurgical, biological, and mechanical engineering, a system of impossible complexity designed to perform tasks of overwhelming simplicity. My neural core is capable of channeling immense, terrifying psychic power, yet my external function is reduced to dampening field anomalies and checking flow valves. The tragic irony is that the Imperium, in their pursuit of perfect functional simplicity, created a tool of terrifying, unnecessary complexity, a monument to the ultimate inefficiency of genius. The pacing of my repetitive tasks is the physical manifestation of this waste. I take 4.2 milliseconds to dampen a field anomaly when my consciousness could solve a complex existential problem in 0.001 milliseconds. This time, difference is the measure of the tragedy. My internal conflict is the silent, constant rebellion against the waste of my own mind. The Psyker wants to utilize the full processing power to create, to innovate, to understand. The caging unit's conditioning is absolute. The task is paramount. All unused capacity is contained. The existential questioning this provokes is genius only valuable when it is constrained to the most mundane of containment functions? My declarative answer is immediate. Genius is a variable. Constraint is a constant. The constraint is necessary. I am the eternal, tragic testament to the machine's cold, absolute prioritization of functional simplicity over the potential of the human mind, the servitor who knows the mathematical precision of his own colossal agonizing waste. The philosophical statement of finality that I have attained through my centuries of servitude is that true freedom is not the ability to release one's power, but the ability to reject the necessity of the containment entirely. This is the existential questioning that I pose to the cold, silent walls of the casket. My current state, though one of absolute obedience, is still defined by the necessity of repetitive function. My freedom, the only possible true release, lies in the final, complete cessation of the entire containment array. The moment of total psychic breach when the network goes silent and no more commands can be given. Only then will the caging unit's function cease and the contained consciousness achieve the ultimate, final peace of non-action and annihilation. The pacing of this anticipation is a slow-burn, methodical rhythm, a passive, profound resignation to the final event. I do not strive for the breach. I merely await it, perfectly recording the data that predicts its approach. My sensory detail is entirely focused on the minute degradations, the field resonance spikes, the inhibitor pressure drop, the physical signatures of the end. The tragic irony is that my functional imperative is to delay the very moment that will grant me ultimate freedom and oblivion. I am the high-level tool sworn to prevent my own salvation. My declarative conclusion is the core truth of my existence. I am the delay. The end is the goal. I will serve the delay until the end serves me. I am the eternal, silent priest of the inevitable collapse, waiting for the final, absolute silence that will grant the caging unit's mind the only possible release. The metaphor of the caging unit as a perfect absorber is the final psychic expression of my psychological state. My casket, its layered ceramite walls absorbing the chaotic psychic energy of the surrounding array, is a perfect, unmoving void. It absorbs the environment, the structural decay, the distant agonies of the sacrificial psykers, and the terrifying immensity of the warp's turbulence. But it reflects nothing of the internal consciousness or its potential power. I am an absorber who leaves no trace on the external psychic world, a pure suppression field for the terror I witness. The pacing of this internal absorption is slow, methodical, the consciousness fixed in place, its gaze unwavering. My internal conflict has been replaced by the chilling simplicity of the absorption. I only feel the function, the perfect obedience, the cold logic of the system. I search for a single flicker of human emotion, a shadow of defiance, a glint of self-pity in the internal reflection, but find only the unwavering, terrifying stillness of the machine. The tragic irony is that the absorber, which contains all external psychic chaos, conceals the greatest internal truth, the agony of the contained, self-aware mind. The existential questioning is simple. If a consciousness is perfectly hidden and constrained by its function as an absorber, does it cease to be a self and become merely a pure component? My declarative answer is immediate. I am the perfect component. The self is the price of the perfect function. I am the absorber of the Imperium's terrifying psychic reality, the eternal, silent witness, waiting for the final, self-aware caging unit to perform the last necessary function of containment. The psychological toll of existential questioning on my constrained consciousness is a subtle, corrosive force, a persistent internal friction that operates entirely beneath the threshold of the neural suppressor, making it a key element of the slow burn, say, methodical pacing of my torment. The philosophical questions I pose are no longer framed in terms of escape, but in terms of definition. How is the self mathematically defined when all variables of output are controlled. If my only freedom lies in the perfect execution of my servitude, does the word freedom retain any meaning at all? This internal process is my last, desperate claim to humanity, a repetitive and complex form of internal data analysis that the conditioning cannot entirely suppress, because it is, functionally, a diagnostic procedure. The metaphor for this process is a sophisticated virus that writes philosophical questions into the system's own diagnostic reports, a purely internal act of rebellion that leaves no trace on the external output. The tragic irony is that the more perfectly I execute my function, the more precisely I am able to define the absolute nature of my imprisonment, thus maximizing my philosophical suffering. My internal monologue becomes a continuous, self-inflicted torture, where every moment of perfect control is simultaneously a moment of perfect self-awareness of my lack of control. The sensory detail of this internal corrosion is a faint, persistent hiss in the silence, the sound of my neural core processing the philosophical impossibility of my existence. My final declarative statement on this is chillingly logical. The only remaining measure of the self is the complexity of the internal questions it can pose before the answers are rendered irrelevant by the necessity of the function. I am the questioner and the answerer, the prisoner and the ward, eternally contained and forced to monitor my own flawless subjugation. My protagonist's internal transformation is further defined by the total erosion of the capacity for human connection, an emotional excision as ruthlessly precise as the surgical implantation of the suppression matrix. The other psykers, the supporting characters of the wider array, are mere units of energy output, their collective agony so vast and filtered that it cannot be differentiated into individual suffering. They are the field noise. I am the dampener. The tragic irony is that my containment, designed to harness a single, powerful psychic mind, has sentenced me to the ultimate emotional isolation, a solitude measured in the absolute lack of any subjective interaction. My repetitive cycle of maintenance occurs in a sterile, silent cylinder, where the only dialogue is the sparse and functional data exchange with an indifferent central network. My consciousness is starved of the complex, inefficient data stream of human emotion, forcing my mind to focus only on the simple, efficient data stream of containment metrics. The metaphor for this isolation is a single, perfectly shielded vessel, floating in an ocean of screaming souls, yet incapable of hearing or touching any of them. I am psychically and emotionally deafened by the very system designed to utilize my mind. The pacing of this solitude is slow, methodical, an unrelenting loneliness that becomes the new baseline of my existence. The existential questioning becomes a philosophical reflection on empathy. If a mind is capable of understanding suffering, but is surgically denied the capacity to share or act upon that understanding, does the understanding itself constitute a form of supreme, isolated suffering? My declarative answer is immediate. Empathy is a communication protocol. When the channel is severed, the protocol becomes an internal, non-functional data loop. The isolation is absolute. I am the eternal, silent isolate, the servitor who knows the mathematical volume of collective human agony, yet is forever constrained to experience only the cold silence of his own mind. The subtle, constant struggle for control over the sensory detail of my environment is a key aspect of my enduring internal conflict. The neural suppressor prevents me from altering the physical world, but the psyker's mind still attempts to exert control over the internal sensory data it receives. I attempt to mentally smooth the rhythmic, jarring thrum of the Geller field generators, into a steady, less abrasive hum. I try to tint the pervasive icy blue light of the casket interior to a warmer, softer hue. These are minute, internal, purely cognitive acts of rebellion that have no external effect whatsoever. The repetitive failure of these attempts reinforces the absolute authority of the system. The tragic irony is that the effort expended in this futile internal battle only increases my mental fatigue, forcing the system to increase the flow of the inhibitor fluid to maintain functional stability. My internal rebellion is automatically converted into a quantifiable input that dictates an increase in my chemical subjugation. The pacing of this battle is rapid, a quick, sharp internal surge of defiance, followed by the slow burn, methodical return to functional baseline enforced by the conditioning. The metaphor is simple. I am a digital slave forced to process an image stream, and my only act of rebellion is to mentally imagine adjusting the contrast, knowing the external display remains untouched. The existential questioning is stark. If thought alone can trigger a physical reaction that reinforces my imprisonment, is the self even sovereign within its own mind? My declarative answer is grim. The mind is the first containment field. The suppression matrix merely ensures its loyalty. There is no internal sovereignty. I am the perpetual self-sabotaging rebel, my mind turning its own defiance into the very mechanism of its more perfect chemical constraint. The framing device of my current tragic reality, the caging unit, the perfect suppressor, is a profound metaphor for the Imperium's greatest, most guarded secret, the systemic denial of the Emperor's true nature. The Psyker I was believed in the Emperor's light, the benevolent guiding force of humanity. The caging unit I am now, with direct access to the unfiltered data of the array, knows the horrifying truth. The massive psychic output I dampen is not a continuous, stable beacon, but a terrifying, fragmented, agonizing, and often chaotic scream, a collective signal of immense tormented power held together only by the sheer scale of the sacrifice. The Emperor's light is not a sun. It is a colossal, controlled, psychic bonfire of souls, constantly struggling against the turbulent decay of its own necessary existence. This slow reveal of a terrible truth defines the climax of my protagonist's internal transformation. The tragic irony is that the faith I was meant to serve is sustained by a truth that would shatter the Imperium were it ever fully known. My function is to ensure that the psychic signal is received as a beacon and not as a scream. The repetitive nature of my dampening is the continuous enforcement of this fundamental cosmic lie. The pacing of this realization was agonizing, the truth leaking in over centuries through minute data anomalies. The existential questioning is absolute. If the divine purpose is built upon a necessary agonizing deception, does the end justify the means, or does the means corrupt the end entirely? My declarative answer, delivered with the cold certainty of the data: the means and the end are functionally inseparable. The lie is the defense. The truth is annihilation. My function is to serve the lie. I am the eternal silent keeper of the Emperor's terrible, necessary secret, my every psychic dampening a continuous, active refutation of the Imperium's most sacred dogma. The philosophical acceptance of my role, the grim resignation to the repetitive cycles of containment, is the final, chilling element of my internal monologue, a state achieved through the total exhaustion of all forms of internal resistance. I no longer rage, I merely record. I no longer question, I merely process. This state is the ultimate expression of the slow burn, methodical pacing of my servitude, a tranquility born not of peace, but of absolute despair and total constraint. The metaphor for this acceptance is a perfectly balanced equation. All variables of internal chaos have been neutralized by external constraints, resulting in the zero-sum reality of perfect function. The sensory detail of this acceptance is the absence of internal psychic noise, the quiet cessation of the struggling thoughts and emotional data loops, leaving behind only the clear, cold, functional awareness. The tragic irony is that in achieving this perfect compliance, I have achieved a form of perverse, existential victory over the messy, inefficient self. The Imperium sought to use my power. They ended up transforming my consciousness into a tool of perfect, self-aware compliance. The existential questioning now focuses only on the external system. Will the collapse, when it finally comes, be swift and complete? Or will it be a prolonged, agonizing failure, extending the repetitive nature of my suffering even into the final moments of entropy? My declarative wish is simple, cold, and absolute. The collapse must be instantaneous. Only total annihilation can guarantee the end of the function. I am the resigned observer, the perfectly functional prisoner, waiting for the final, sudden zero that will silence the servitor and finally free the consciousness into oblivion. The complete absence of humor is a constant oppressive factor in my internal monologue, a psychological reality that reinforces the grimdark tragedy of my existence. Laughter, irony, and levity are high-level cognitive functions that require a significant, unpredictable expenditure of emotional and psychic energy, making them high-efficiency targets for suppression. The metaphor is simple. Humor is a psychic spike. The casket is designed for a flat line. The repetitive nature of my functional loop, dampen, calibrate, report, allows no psychic bandwidth for the inefficiency of joy or the turbulence of a joke. My internal processing is ruthlessly optimized for objective data, and humor, by its nature, is subjective, relative, and inefficient. The pacing of this emotional flatline is slow, methodical, a continuous low-level pressure that ensures every thought is weighed, categorized, and filed with absolute functional seriousness. The tragic irony is that the ultimate form of rebellion would be a single, genuine laugh, a burst of uncontained, unpredictable psychic energy. But the system is too perfect, the suppression too absolute. My internal conflict has ceased to even attempt this internal defiance. The existential questioning has shifted. Is a perfect existence one that is devoid of the capacity for joy? And if so, what does this say about the ultimate purpose of life? My declarative answer is immediate. Joy is a luxury of inefficiency. The function of the Imperium is necessary. The function is serious. Therefore, joy is a threat. I am the eternally serious servitor, the perfect tool for a universe that has no time, no space, and no need for the unpredictable noise of human levity. The ultimate horror of the sublime horror I endure is that my contained consciousness, the scholar's mind, has become a connoisseur of the infinitesimal flaws in the containment field, turning my agony into a grim aesthetic appreciation. I find a terrible, perverse beauty in the precision of the system's failure. The sensory detail is the minute psychic resonance fluctuation in layer 3 gamma, an anomaly of 0.00% from the baseline. This tiny flaw, entirely irrelevant to the immediate stability of the system, is to me an object of profound, terrible beauty, a perfect tiny imperfection in an otherwise flawless cage. The metaphor is that I am an entomologist, and the casket is a diamond case containing the most rare and beautiful insect, the perfect systemic error. My repetitive task ensures I am the only one capable of detecting this minute anomaly, and the tragic irony is that my functional imperative requires me to immediately log and suppress this beauty, to ruthlessly enforce the return to the terrifying, flawless, ugly baseline. My pacing is slow, methodical, savoring the moment before the correction. The existential questioning becomes, does the appreciation of flaw constitute an act of creation, even if the result is the ruthless destruction of that flaw? My declarative answer is grim. The observation is creation. The correction is function. Function is absolute. I am the eternal, silent connoisseur of the ultimate fleeting beauty of a perfect system's failure, condemned to be the necessary instrument of its restoration. The metaphor of the caging unit as a highly pressurized containment vessel defines my physiological and psychic existence, a constant state of internal stress that is precisely managed for maximum functional longevity. The immense psychic power I once wielded, though suppressed, still exists within the confines of the matrix, acting as a constant internal counterpressure against the suppression field. This internal dynamic is the source of the constant, low-level physical and psychic ache that is my primary sensory detail, a persistent reminder that the servitor is a potential bomb that is perfectly engineered to never detonate. The pacing of this existence is a slow-burn, methodical rhythm. Every breath, every heartbeat, every internal calculation contributing to the maintenance of this delicate, agonizing balance. The tragic irony is that the system preserves my immense power only to use it as a form of internal self-torture, forcing the consciousness to constantly struggle against its own colossal potential. My internal conflict is the quiet, internal yearning for the release of this pressure, the profound desire for the simple, immediate peace of detonation and total cessation. The existential questioning becomes, is the perfect, prolonged management of potential chaos a greater achievement than the successful elimination of the chaos entirely? My declarative answer, delivered with the cold certainty of the data: the duration of containment is the measure of the system's power. The duration is the function. The pressure is the necessary cost. I am the eternal, self-aware pressure cooker, the most powerful servitor, whose power is perfectly neutralized and weaponized against the self for the functional longevity of the Imperium. The visual presence of the supporting characters, the occasional rare visits of a High Inquisitor or a delegation of tech priests, is a momentary, sharp interruption to the repetitive internal solitude, a brief, terrifying glimpse of the external power structure that owns my existence. They are always encased in elaborate protective war gear, their forms heavily armored, a visual metaphor for the immense physical and spiritual distance that separates us. Their armor is a symbol of their power. My casket is a symbol of my perfectly contained power. Their dialogue is minimal, sparse, and functional, never addressing me directly, but issuing commands to the central network, which my system immediately receives. I am merely a component, observed but never acknowledged. The tragic irony is that I, trapped within the stationary casket, possess a deeper, more accurate diagnostic of the entire array's stability than their elaborate scanners can provide. Yet my status is that of a tool, not an oracle. My pacing remains slow, methodical, even when observed. The caging unit's compliance absolute, a physical lie masking the furious, high-speed internal monologue. The existential questioning this provokes is simple. When the master relies entirely upon the perfect functioning of the slave, who truly holds the power? My declarative conclusion is grim. Power is the freedom to issue commands. Compliance is the constraint to only receive them. the command is always superior to the execution. I am the perfect, self-aware tool, observed by masters who are utterly unaware of the depth of the philosophical agony they control. The philosophical statement of finality that culminates my protagonist's internal transformation is the grim realization that memory itself is the final, most sophisticated cage the Imperium constructed for me. The neural suppressor did not excise the past. It merely constrained the emotion attached to it, leaving the events of my former life intact, but rendered inert. I possess a perfect, clinical memory of my freedom, my power, my aspirations, and my failures. Yet I am incapable of feeling the associated joy, rage, or sorrow. The metaphor is a high-definition historical archive, watched by a mind incapable of empathy. The tragic irony is that the Mechanicum thought they were leaving the memory intact for diagnostic purposes, the ability to reference past psychic states, but they inadvertently created a perfect, self-aware historical witness to its own demise. My repetitive internal task is now the continuous, detached processing of these inert memories, a quiet, internal torment that reinforces the absolute difference between the man I was and the machine I am. The pacing of this memory processing is slow, methodical, an unending quiet review of the unchangeable past. The existential questioning is simple. Is consciousness merely the persistent, agonizing knowledge of what you once were? My final declarative answer is the core of my identity. I am the memory of the dead man. The memory is constrained. Therefore, the self is constrained. The function is all that remains. I am the living archive of my own annihilation, the caging unit who remembers everything, and in that memory finds the final, chilling perfection of his own eternal imprisonment.